An independent editorial defense analysis focused on Australia's strategic environment.
The precipitous termination of the F-15IDN program, confirmed by Boeing executives at the recent Singapore Air Show, represents far more than a failed commercial transaction between Jakarta and Washington. From a systems engineering perspective, this cancellation serves as a critical stress test. It tests the prevailing model of air power modernization in Southeast Asia. It exposes a fundamental structural misalignment between the operational ambitions of the Indonesian Air Force and the fiscal realities of sustaining fourth- and fifth-generation heavy fighter platforms. For Australia, this rupture in the regional procurement pipeline offers a rare, asymmetric strategic opening. The collapse of the heavy fighter deal creates a vacuum. It is a void that the traditional manned aviation market simply cannot fill without inducing fiscal asphyxiation. This illuminates a potential export pathway for the MQ-28 Ghostbat, one that aligns Australian industrial sovereignty with Indonesian archipelagic defense requirements. The core of the issue lies in the prohibitive life cycle costs associated with high-performance manned platforms. While the acquisition cost of a modern F-15EX variant is substantial, the total system cost, including sustainment, pilot training, and infrastructure, creates a burden that disproportionately affects medium-sized air forces. Estimates suggest that the cost per flight hour for such heavy fighters ranges between $29,000 and $32,000. For a defense budget that has historically struggled to maintain operational readiness across a diverse and fragmented fleet of Russian, American, and French hardware, the introduction of a heavy fighter wing would likely cannibalize the sustainment funds for the recently acquired Rafale fleet. This creates a scenario of nominal capability. Airframes exist on the tarmac but lack the flight hours and logistical depth to generate effective sorties during a crisis. This fiscal reality collides with the immutable geographic constraints of the Indonesian archipelago. The requirement to police an exclusive economic zone that stretches over 5,000 kilometers demands range and persistence. These are attributes typically associated with heavy fighters. However, the inability to afford these platforms leaves a critical coverage gap. Now, this is particularly acute along the northern approaches near the Natuna Islands. This gap presents a distinct operational opportunity for the Australian-designed MQ-28 Ghostbat. Unlike the F-15, which represents a concentration of financial risk in a single asset, the MQ-28 offers a model of distributed lethality. With a projected production cost estimated at roughly 1/10 that of a manned heavy fighter, the economic calculus shifts. The focus moves from preserving a handful of prestige assets to deploying a resilient sensor network. The operational profile of the Ghostbat appears uniquely suited to the specific doctrine of archipelagic defense. The platform boasts a ferry range of approximately 3,700 kilometers. This allows it to transit from bases in Java to patrol zones in the South China Sea and return without the absolute reliance on aerial refueling, a capability that remains a logistical bottleneck for the Indonesian Air Force. Furthermore, the capacity of the MQ-28 to operate from shorter, less developed runways allows for a dispersed basing concept. This reduces vulnerability to a first strike. It is a critical consideration given the lack of strategic depth and integrated air and missile defense systems across the region. A fleet of autonomous systems acting as sensor nodes or weapons carriers offers a method to generate mass and presence without the attendant pilot fatigue or the political risk of personnel capture. From the perspective of the Australian industrial base, the failure of the F-15 deal is a catalyst. It acts as a driver for maturing the sovereign autonomous sector. The viability of the MQ-28 program as a continuous industrial enterprise in Queensland depends on achieving economies of scale that the Royal Australian Air Force cannot provide alone. Domestic orders for Block 2 and the developmental Block 3 variants provide a foundational baseload, but reducing the unit cost to a level that makes the system truly expendable requires an export market. Indonesia represents a geographically logical partner. It has a clearly defined capability gap that Western manned aviation cannot close at an acceptable price point. Integrating Indonesian requirements into the production cycle would stabilize the supply chain. It would validate the concept of Australia as a high-technology exporter rather than merely a consumer of foreign defense products. Transposing this industrial logic into a strategic reality, however, introduces complex friction points regarding technology transfer and alliance management. The primary constraint is not aerodynamic, but algorithmic. The value of the Ghostbat resides less in its airframe than in its autonomous mission system and the combat cloud that allows it to team with manned assets. Sharing this software architecture with a non-aligned partner raises significant concerns regarding intellectual property and operational security. There is a distinct trade-off between the economic benefits of export and the imperative to protect the decision-making superiority of Australian and allied forces. A potential solution involves the development of an export variant with a modular mission system. This would decouple the sensitive collaborative combat algorithms used by the Royal Australian Air Force from the flight control and sensor fusion layers offered to international customers. This technological decoupling would also need to navigate the regulatory landscape of U.S. export controls. While the Ghostbat is an Australian flagship program, its propulsion and certain sensor components remain subject to ITAR restrictions. The fact that Indonesia already operates U.S. platforms like the F-16 and C-130J suggests that a regulatory pathway exists. This assumes the political will in Washington aligns with the strategic utility of strengthening Indonesia's maritime awareness. A stronger Indonesian surveillance capability serves the broader interest of regional stability. This potentially overrides concerns about the proliferation of unmanned combat systems. The integration of such a system would essentially rewrite the tactical playbook for the region. Instead of a direct mirror image of Western air forces, Indonesia would adopt an asymmetric force structure. Manned fighters like the Rafale would act as localized command nodes for a wider net of Australian-built autonomous wingmen. This evolution would require a shift in doctrine from platform-centric warfare to network-centric operations. This transition poses its own challenges in training and organizational culture. The presence of Indonesian officers in Australian command structures, as facilitated by the recent security treaty, provides a mechanism to socialize these concepts. It helps build the necessary trust for such a high level of technical integration. Ultimately, the divergence between Jakarta's strategic needs and its budgetary capacity has created a systemic flaw. Traditional procurement cannot fix this. The cancellation of the F-15IDN is not merely a pause in modernization. It is a signal that the era of relying solely on heavy manned fighters for regional policing is reaching a point of diminishing returns. The MQ-28 Ghostbat stands as the most logical technical answer to this resource constraint. It offers a way to substitute capital for labor and mass for prestige. Whether the political and industrial systems in Canberra and Jakarta can align to capitalize on this logic remains an open question. But the physics of the operational environment and the economics of defense acquisition suggest that the solution to the northern gap lies in autonomy rather than increased tonnage.